United States, Idaho, June 30th, 1995. Many believe that we are alone in the universe. However, one day something inexplicable happened. Something that forced us to ask ourselves, is this really true? It was an ordinary hot summer evening in a small town near Boise, Idaho. The air was thick and heavy, and the hot gusts of wind rose over the fields like waves of heat visible on the horizon during scorching days. The town, though quiet, fully felt the discomfort of summer. The day's heat had not yet dissipated, even though the sun had long since disappeared behind the hills, and the night had fallen deep. All the residents were waiting for even a slight cooling that the night might bring. In the surrounding houses, windows were wide open in the hope of a gentle breeze bringing relief after an exhausting, sweltering day. Mitch Jensen, a 24-year-old farm worker, was getting ready for another night shift. He had been working on Fred Connors' farm for almost 3 years since he returned to his hometown after a brief stint in the military. This place had always been a safe haven for him, though at times he felt trapped, as if the daily routine and monotony of life there were starting to weigh on him. Despite this, he liked the work on the farm. The farm belonged to old Fred Connors, one of the wealthiest farmers in the area. Connors was a tough man, sparing with words, yet generous in paying his workers. He knew that working in his fields wasn't easy. Long hours, the constant noise of machines, and the scorching heat of summer could wear anyone down. But Mitch was one of the few who gladly agreed to work at night. It wasn't about the money. Mitch simply enjoyed the silence of the night. At that time of day, the world took on a completely different pace. At night, there were no noisy tractors, no hustle and bustle of daily life, and no clamor from other workers. There was only darkness, the cornfields rustling lightly in the wind, and the sounds of nature soothing his senses. He loved those moments when he sat alone in the truck, facing nothing but an endless sea of green and the starry sky overhead. For Mitch, the night shifts were moments of escape, times when he felt like the whole world slowed down for a moment. During these nights, it was just him and nature. That evening, the sky was exceptionally clear. The stars shone above like diamonds on black velvet, and the nearly full moon illuminated the vast cornfields that stretched all the way to the horizon. The moonlight had something magical about it. It made the night not completely dark, and the fields seemed to glisten in the silver glow. From Mitch's perspective, everything looked calm, almost idyllic. In such moments, he could swear that life on the farm was almost perfect, if only someone could see the beauty and simplicity. He sat in his small, well-worn truck, its engine humming quietly, giving off a light vibration that Mitch felt with a comforting sense of stability. He knew this truck, inside and out. It had been with him for 2 years, and though its body was covered in rust and the interior had long lost its factory scent, it was reliable. Mitch always took care of it because he knew it was what gave him mobility on the farm's vast lands. Sitting behind the wheel, he sipped cold cola straight from the can. The coolness of the drink was a pleasant contrast to the heavy, muggy air that permeated even through the truck's open windows. Mitch tilted his head back, allowing himself a moment of relaxation. He was scrolling through his phone, skimming through messages and browsing social media. These moments when he could disconnect from his duties and immerse himself in the virtual world were his form of rest. The internet connected him to the reality beyond the town, reminded him of the friends he had left behind in Boise, and the life that still went on, far away from the farm. However, as time passed, he grew to appreciate the peace that fieldwork offered, something that was missing in the city's hustle and bustle. He was waiting for the machines to finish irrigating the fields. This process usually took several hours, and Mitch's job was to supervise the work and ensure everything was running smoothly. He knew this routine by heart. Watering the corn was essential, especially on such hot nights when the earth literally absorbed the water, and the plants fought desperately to survive under the blazing sun. Mitch knew that thanks to these night efforts, the fields would be abundant with crops come fall. As he sat and watched the machinery, he felt something that unsettled him. Something strange in the air, like a subtle change he couldn't identify at first. He furrowed his brow, pulling his eyes away from the phone that had previously drawn him into the depths of the internet. At first, it was just a small light, like a distant flash in the sky. Mitch immediately thought it might be a plane, which was quite normal. Airlines often flew over the area, and the town lay on the route of several commercial flights. However, this light was different, too bright and too low to be a plane at cruising altitude. He furrowed his brow, staring at the point in the sky, trying to see more. The light moved in a way that initially seemed natural, but with each passing second, became more chaotic. It definitely wasn't a star or a satellite, as those had steady, predictable trajectories. Mitch squinted, trying to make out exactly what he was observing. What he initially thought was the distant reflection of a plane began to rapidly change directions. The light would glide in one direction, then suddenly stop and move the opposite way. It was a movement that certainly didn't resemble any aircraft flight pattern he knew. Mitch felt adrenaline begin to rush through his veins. Something was wrong. He could have ignored it, dismissed it as an illusion, but his instincts told him this wasn't some random phenomenon. He sensed there was more to it, something that crossed the boundaries of normalcy. He sat up straight, glancing at his watch. It was almost midnight, yet the light hadn't disappeared. Instead, it was starting to get closer. The lights were now clearer. Mitch saw that it wasn't just one light, but several, spaced evenly apart. They moved in formation, as if controlled by something larger that remained hidden in the darkness. At first glance, it looked like a fleet of drones, but their movements were too fast, too precise. Mitch stared at the sky with a growing sense of unease. The lights moved in a chaotic way, with every change in direction feeling surprising and unpredictable. It was like a dance, but not one that evoked beauty and harmony. This was a dance of disquiet. His instincts told him he shouldn't be standing there, yet his curiosity pushed him forward. As the object drew closer, Mitch noticed some of the lights changing color. They began flickering in different shades: red, green, blue. Each color seemed to pulse in rhythm with a faint sound he hadn't noticed before. It was like a melody creeping into his mind. Mitch felt as though each color pulled at his attention, almost hypnotizing him. He looked away, trying to fight the disorientation, but it was harder than he expected. Instead, his mind started spinning all kinds of theories. What could this be? What kind of objects could emit such lights? Finally, unable to resist, Mitch got out of the truck to get a better look at what was happening. The ground beneath his feet was hot, and the air shimmered with the heat rising from the fields. However, he had no intention of returning to the truck. Instead, he walked to the edge of the cornfield, standing on a small rise that gave him a better view of the strange phenomena. Looking up, he noticed that one of the lights hovering over the field began descending toward him. Mitch held his breath. The object was now close enough that he could make out its shape. These were not drones or planes, as he had initially thought. It resembled something like a large disc with a smooth, shiny surface, as if made of metal, and its edges seemed to ripple slightly, as though the object pulsed with life. As Mitch stared at the approaching object, a sudden wave of fear washed over him. He recalled all the stories of UFOs, of alien abductions, of mysterious disappearances. They were just tales, he thought, but still, his heart pounded wildly. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like jelly. Instead, driven by intrigue, he stayed rooted to the spot as the object drew nearer to the ground. The object stopped about 20 meters above the ground. Mitch saw that an intense green light began to emanate from beneath it. What happened next looked like a scene from a science fiction movie. Mitch watched as flashes began to appear in the air around the object, and at their center, a powerful light flared, drawing his gaze, making him feel almost dazed. At that moment, Mitch felt a strange tingling sensation on his skin, as if every hair on his body stood on end. Suddenly, his phone began flickering and making noises. Shocked, Mitch picked it up, but the screen was black, and it wasn't working, as if the object was disrupting the signal. Trying to make sense of what was happening, Mitch looked up again to inspect the object. He saw thin, bright beams of light begin to descend from the bottom, gently moving downward until they touched the ground. Mitch's heart raced as one of the beams directed itself toward him. He felt as though something invisible was pulling him into the midst of this extraordinary situation. Then, a wave of dizziness overtook him, and his vision began to blur. Before he could react, the light enveloped him, and he felt as though he was floating, being lifted off the ground. For several seconds, there was total silence. Mitch lost all sense of time and space, as if he was floating in another dimension. He felt like his mind had been pushed beyond the boundaries of reality. He didn't know if he was conscious or dreaming. His thoughts were in chaos, and the only sensation accompanying him was a sudden awareness that he was at the heart of something beyond his comprehension. Eventually, he felt the solid ground beneath his feet again. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a different place. He was in an enclosed room, illuminated by soft white light. The walls were smooth and appeared to be made of some unknown material. Around him were low, futuristic devices pulsing with gentle light as if done charged with energy. Mitch had no idea what was happening, but his heart was racing. Frightened, he looked around for an exit, but the room had no windows or doors. He felt trapped. Somehow, it all seemed to make sense. Once again, he sensed that he was not just an observer, but a participant in this extraordinary phenomenon. He saw figures appearing before him, humanoid in shape, though their features were vague and blurry. They weren't human, but they weren't entirely alien either. One of the figures stepped forward. It was slender, with long, thin limbs. Its skin, or whatever it was, gleamed in the light. Mitch felt growing fear, but at the same time, something drew him toward the being. It seemed to emanate calmness, as if it understood his fears and could soothe them. Without words, only through thoughts, Mitch felt as if the being was conveying peace to him. "Don't be afraid," it seemed to say. Mitch struggled to comprehend what was happening. It was too surreal. As he approached the figure, he noticed its eyes were larger than a human's, an intense blue color, staring at him with an extraordinary wisdom. He felt as if their gaze penetrated him completely, seeing all his fears, hopes, and desires. For a moment, he forgot about his surroundings. And then, as if through a telepathic connection, Mitch received visions, images of different places, people, and events. The images flashed before his eyes, as if he was flipping through films of his entire life. There were moments of joy, sadness, uncertainty, and fear. He remembered his family, the dreams he had always postponed. Each of these images was a reflection of himself. Suddenly, a particular image appeared in the visions. Mitch saw himself, but not as he was now. He saw himself as a child, running through the garden, dreaming of adventures. Then the vision shifted to his adult life, and finally, he saw himself in a military uniform, returning home after a difficult mission. The feelings were so intense that he almost forgot where he was. He felt like he was in a trance. As the visions faded, Mitch noticed that the being standing before him had adopted a neutral expression, and its eyes seemed to radiate understanding. The fear that had earlier gripped him gave way to an unprecedented connection, as if both sides were establishing contact on a level he had never experienced before. He realized he was witnessing something far greater than he could have ever imagined. His mind was flooded with images of the future, with unknown paths and choices that could shape the fate of humanity. He felt that the reality surrounding him was a reflection of all the values he had ever known. In that moment, he understood that his life held significance in a broader context. Every person, every decision, influences the course of history. Suddenly, Mitch was surrounded by a glow that consumed him. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in a cornfield, bathed in the light of a bright moon. For a moment, he was disoriented, trying to understand what had just happened. No object was hovering above him anymore, and only a gentle breeze brushed against his face. Shocked, he got up from the ground, his heart still racing, trying to return to reality. In his mind, the images from their encounter still swirled, those visions that had affected him so deeply. Though the night was quiet and peaceful, a weight had settled in Mitch's heart that he couldn't shake. He felt like he couldn't just go back to his old life. He knew that this experience, incredible as it was, had changed him forever, though he wasn't sure if it was for the better. Mitch slowly headed toward his truck. His thoughts were tangled, full of what he had seen, and perhaps what he wished he hadn't seen. He had crossed a boundary between what he knew and what now seemed unreachable. He got into the car, looked up at the sky, and noticed that the same stars that once gave him a sense of peace now felt distant and unfamiliar. As he drove toward the farm, Mitch began to notice something unsettling. While everyone's life is intertwined with the lives of others, he no longer felt that connection. He felt isolated, as if what he had experienced had severed him from the rest of the world. The thought of returning to daily life, interacting with other people, now felt overwhelming. He had the sense that no one could possibly understand what he had gone through. When he arrived at the farm, he was greeted by an eerie silence, broken only by the rustling wind and distant sounds of nature. Mitch took a deep breath, but the fresh air that once brought him comfort now felt suffocating. His heart was full of uncertainty. Nothing looked the same anymore. He stopped in front of the house, staring at the flickering lights through the windows. He felt the need to share what he had experienced, but with each passing minute, the belief grew stronger that no one would believe him. Worse still, he began to doubt whether what he had experienced was real. Did what he saw actually happen? Or was it some hallucination, born from the loneliness of late nights on the farm? The longer he thought about it, the more fragile reality seemed. Eventually, he approached the door and opened it, but the warmth of the house that once brought him comfort now elicited no emotion. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee but couldn't finish it. Sitting at the table, he stared blankly into the darkness beyond the window, thinking about everything that had happened, or maybe what he thought had happened. Mitch knew that nothing would ever be the same, but instead of feeling excitement or determination, he felt only the weight of the unknown. The promise of a new beginning, which had once been in his heart, now seemed distant, almost illusory. Instead of hope, there was a fear. Would anything awaiting him bring more than further isolation? In the silence of his home, Mitch made only one promise to himself. He would stay silent. Maybe what he had seen wasn't meant for others. Maybe his story, like that night, was never meant to see the light of day. And though he knew the experience had changed him forever, he wasn't sure he would ever find the strength to understand it. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. If you have your own story, experiences, or evidence related to UFOs, please email us. Your story is important and can help others who have had similar experiences. UFO X-Files connects us. You are not alone.